Okay, I wanted to welcome everybody to the fourth and final session in the Realtor training series. My name is John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. The California Preservation Foundation is a membership-based, not-for-profit organization whose mission is to provide statewide leadership in education and advocacy to ensure protection of historic resources in California. Today's session, the final session in the four-part Realtor training series, will look at financial incentives and sustainability for historic properties. We have planners and the executive director of a nonprofit advocacy organization on our panel of speakers who will speak for approximately 60 to 75 minutes total. We will close with a 15-minute quiz Q&A period. Note there's a chat box on the bottom which is visible to all participants. If you would like to comment or interject, or if you have any technical problems, you may do so through the chat box. If you are connected to a mobile device using the Adobe Connect mobile app, certain interactive features may not be available, but you should still be able to watch and listen to the presentation. If you are attached to a microphone, by default your microphone is disabled, but if you would like to be unmuted, you would need to raise your hand by clicking on the hand symbol at the top of your screen. Once your hand is raised, we will grant you voice access at an appropriate time in the presentation. This will allow you to have a short dialogue with the speakers or ask a question in person. If for some reason your sound does not work, you will need to type in your question or response in the chat box. I am now going to introduce today's speakers. For the past 3 years, Mike Buehler has served as Executive Director of San Francisco Heritage, a nonprofit organization founded in 1971 to preserve and enhance San Francisco's unique architectural and cultural identity. Mike previously worked as the Director of Advocacy for the Los Angeles Conservancy from 2006 to 2010, and Regional Attorney for the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Western Office in San Francisco from 1998 to 2006. He holds a JD from Santa Clara University School of Law and a BA degree in history from the University of Washington in Seattle. Eilish Tuffy is a planner and preservation technical specialist for the City and County of San Francisco. She has previously worked for historic preservation commissions in both Cambridge, Massachusetts and Chicago, Illinois, and served as program director of the statewide preservation advocacy group Landmarks Illinois. Kelly Wong is a preservation planner with the San Francisco Planning Department. Before joining the department, she was preservation project manager at the Presidio Trust in San Francisco, and previously worked with Architectural Resources Group, working in both the architecture and conservation groups. With over 13 years of experience in preservation, Kelly brings to the planning department her background in architecture, documentation, and treatment of historic buildings, sustainability, her technical expertise in materials conservation, and her experience on both domestic and international projects. She received her undergraduate degree in architecture from the University of California at Berkeley, and her master's degree in historic preservation with an emphasis on architectural conservation from the University of Pennsylvania. Without further ado, we will now begin the presentation with Eilish.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so I've got an outline here of just the basic topics that we're going to cover today. Financial incentives, both local, federal, and state, and then also the more project-based initiatives, and we'll kind of drill down into specific projects that potential home buyers might be contemplating even at the outset of looking at a property. So I'm going to start out here with the Mills Act. And the Mills Act is very helpful, and it's going to be an incredibly useful tool as of late as the property taxes only continue to rise. This is a form of state legislation that was enacted in 1972. It was adopted by San Francisco in 1996, and what it is it's a tool for revitalizing older historic neighborhoods and commercial districts. So it applies to both residential commercial, and also industrial properties. Most of the projects that we see come through are single-family residences, but it is open to a multitude of property types. The the program has been around since '96. It really only started to kind of see an uptick in recent years because there were some amendments to the program back in 2012 that implemented tighter timeframes to process these contracts. It took a long time to process them in the past, so now that homeowners can be guaranteed that the applications will go through in a timely fashion, we've really seen a large increase in the past 2 years. So we currently hold 19 contracts. The vast majority of those have come through in the past 2 years. And as realtors, it's good to know about it because it's especially beneficial to recent buyers who have purchased properties that recently underwent major improvements, or if that is something that they're looking to do as part of purchasing this property. I'm talking about San Francisco. However, the State Office of Historic Preservation maintains a list of participating communities on their website. So if you are working in other communities, just know that it's not just San Francisco. This is statewide legislation in Oakland, Berkeley, Danville, Palo Alto, San Jose. A number of the surrounding Bay Area communities also have the Mills Act in place. This is just a graphic showing the actual application, which can be found on our website. This presentation I know will be accessible after the fact, so I just wanted to make sure that the link to where you can find these materials later is embedded in the presentation. So brief summary of what Mills Act is. This is a contract that the property owners enter into with the local municipality. And the eligible properties that can take advantage of this incentive are those properties that have some form of historic designation on them. I know that you've been hearing a lot over the earlier modules about different forms of designation. So individually listed local landmarks or National Register properties, as well as those that fall within local, state, or national historic districts, can all be considered for the Mills Act. If it's a district, it has to be a contributing building. So, if it's sort of an oddball building within a larger district that doesn't really contribute to the period of significance, then that would be a rare example where that building might not qualify. So as part of the contract, the owner agrees to a 10-year maintenance plan, and this is a way that we as staff can work with property owners to do an assessment of the property and sort of figure out what some of the priority projects should be. Kelly's presentation a little bit later is going to talk about some specific projects, and a lot of what she's going to be covering are projects that would be included on a maintenance plan for a Mills Act. The property taxes, the benefit is that the owner's property taxes are adjusted and they're lowered through a process we'll touch upon in just a minute. They're adjusted annually. And one thing to know is that this contract, once it's in place, it does run with the property. So if the owner chooses to sell, the contract doesn't end. It is tied to the deed and the title of the property, so the subsequent owner will be in the contract as well. The 10-year program, it renews every year. If at any point in time the owner who initiated the contract or a subsequent owner wants to break that contract, they would just have to ride out the remaining period of the 10-year contract. So they can cancel it, but they have to see out the rest of the 10-year contract that's in place. And the idea behind this is that by offering the property owners an offset in their property taxes, that will help to go into the maintenance of the property. Historic properties usually are held to a higher standard as far as making improvements to the visible portions of the building to ensure that they retain their historic appearance. So some of that custom work, might be a little more costly than an average property. So the idea is that this incentive will help go back into the property and make up for some of those expenses. And as a city, it ensures that we have good people in the buildings who really are good stewards of the properties and are maintaining these districts that we have already acknowledged are significant to the community. So this is the very complicated portion of the Mills Act, and this is why we partner with the assessor's office, because they work all the numbers for us. Essentially, the way that they calculate the savings to the property owner is threefold. They do 3 different versions of valuation, and the one that what they base it on is the income producing potential for that property. So rather than using the current market value, it's the amount of income that the owner would receive if their house was to be rented out. And it factors in the remaining useful life of the building as part of the calculation. So if you're maintaining the building and the assessor determines that the property has a useful life of an additional 60 years, that's all calculated in how much income you could generate if the property was rented over the life of the building, 60 years, and then they take out some portion of that figure for time that the property might be vacant in between tenants and the like, and at the end of the day they come up with 3 different values. So if you look down at this step 2, the 3 different values, it's also up here at the top in this shaded box. There's the restricted income approach, which is the Mills Act calculation, market value, and then the factored base year value. When the assessor looks at this, they automatically will go with the lowest value of the 3. And then it's broken out down here to show what the property owner would have paid annually in their taxes, which in this example would have been $12,645. And then the adjusted amount based on the Mills Act calculation, which is $7,000, a little over $7,000. So their estimated savings is $5,398, and that's a 42% savings on their annual taxes. The average saving is usually anywhere between 40 and 60%. And when you spread that out over a 10-year period, if someone were to just enter into the contract for the minimal amount of time, then it really adds up. We do have, as part of our application, this Mills Act process and timeline. And I think this is probably the most helpful tool if you wanted to provide something to your potential buyers. Direct them to the website, and this shows the timeline. May 1 is the deadline for owners to get application materials into us, and we as staff work very closely with them to make sure that all their materials are in order, and also that the projects that they are proposing to do are realistic, and that over that 10-year time frame they're really planning to do work that is going to be reasonable for their budget as well. So going through the process, here's May 1, just so you know how to read this. May 1 is our application date. It basically takes from June 1 through the summer for the assessor's office to run all the proper calculations that they need to, and they will come up with a valuation for the property owners to
You want to
look
bring
at,
the drugs with you? Thank
and
you.
they'll have an opportunity to see whether or not this seems like, based on the assessor's calculations, um, this is a good contract for them to enter into. If they decide that it's really not a savings that's worth a whole lot to them, they have any reservations whatsoever, they will have an opportunity to opt out of the process before a contract is signed. So they can see full well monetarily what type of advantage this would be for them before they have to commit to the program. So I know that this is really quick, but some of the questions that often come up is the building condition. People wonder if the property has to be in really bad condition to qualify. That's not the case. We see properties in a variety of conditions coming in. Some have already, have been well maintained already, but the work that has been done within a year prior to the contract is eligible retroactively as long as it was done in accordance with preservation standards. So we would look at that as well. Oftentimes, people do a lot of work as they're ramping up to sell their property. So as long as they did that work that in accordance with guidelines, then the new owner could take advantage of that retroactively. The other thing is we would have to look through city records to make sure that there aren't any violations on the property. So as part of due diligence, when these owners are looking to buy the property, hopefully they would have found that out and discovered that in advance. But that would be something that would need to be taken care of before we could do this. And qualifying work, as I mentioned, some of the projects that Kelly are going to outline would be typical things that would qualify. The main thing is that it can't be just aesthetic projects. So if you just want to upgrade your kitchen and bath, or if you want to expand a sunroom off the rear, things that make the property more comfortable to you to live in, but don't necessarily extend the life of the building as a historic resource, those are projects that would not qualify. The ones that we would be looking at are things like fixing a leaky roof, or doing maintenance and rehabilitation of items like original millwork on the front of the building, ornament for porches or friezes or window restoration, items like that. So things that actually make sure that this building is going to continue to be a historic contributing building in the district in perpetuity. And the planned projects also receive an expedited review. When we set up that maintenance plan with a property owner, we're already pre-screening the details of how that work needs to happen and kind of building in the standards that the homeowner would have to adhere to. And since most of these buildings are already in landmark districts or individually landmarked, they're really the guidelines that they would have to adhere to regardless of whether they were in a Mills Act or not in a Mills Act. So that's one of the reasons why this contract is really a good thing, because they're getting the advantage financially for work that they would have to be doing to this standard anyway. So at any rate, the maintenance plan that we work out, we talk about the proper way to go about the projects, and rather than having to go to the Historic Preservation Commission for a public hearing, those projects that are outlined in the maintenance plan can just be approved at the staff level. So that makes things move along a little faster for everybody. And like I said, the savings to the property owner, I put the very low end on here, 5% up to 50%. Sometimes we've had projects come through that see a 75% savings based on the calculations, but on average, we're talking more like 40 to 50. I have a note here about the California Prop 13 exceptions, because some of those properties that had their property taxes fixed back in the 70s and have only increased by a very small increment since that time. If owners have owned the property since then, sometimes the savings ends up to not be as beneficial to them. And those are the people that sometimes we see kind of drop out before they sign the contract. And that's fine, but at least, they can go through the exercise. It's calculated annually by the assessor's office, and like I said, the applicants can opt out between the valuation and the signing of the contract. So the fee to apply is $2,500, but when you look at the savings that they could get over the course of 10 years if they were in the program for the minimal amount of time, it's a pretty good investment to make up front for that property tax savings. And I will definitely be able to take questions. I don't know if, Jonathan, you want me to take them now or at the end. I want to make sure everybody has their time in our segments.
I think according to what I'm looking at right now, we're doing well on time. So I think we should address the questions right now, the ones that immediately came in. And I think the first one that came in was Anna was asking, clearly the savings are impressive. Does being part of the Mills Act program put more stringent restrictions on the renovation of the property than if you were just dealing with the historic significance? I think you briefly covered that, but maybe you can readdress it somewhat.
Sure. Right. So in order to be eligible to take the incentive through the Mills Act program, you already have to be designated, either individually or as part of a larger designated district. So yes, whether or not you participate in Mills Act contract or not, if someone were to come forward and pull a building permit with the city to do some sort of an exterior improvement, they would actually have to adhere to the same levels of work and the standards for historic preservation that the Mills Act participants do. So it's really one and the same. So that's why it's kind of it's a win-win. If you enter into the contract or don't enter into the contract, you still have to do the same level of work, but the Mills Act folks are seeing a financial benefit for that.
Great. And second question that came in from Barbara is, can the property be owner occupied and or rented during the process? And then there was another question, but I'll wait for that.
Sure. So the property is open to single-family residences and multifamily as well. So oftentimes the single-family residences that we see, they are owner occupied. The multifamily are typically owner occupied, and then they rent, the other units.
Okay, and that sort of addressed this second part of the question. If anybody else has any further questions for this portion of the presentation, speak now. Otherwise, we'll have a closing Q&A session later to address anything that comes up. So I think we're good to move on to the next one, which is Mike Bueller.
Okay.
1 second, I'll pull it up.
Okay, hello everyone. This is Mike Bueller. Everybody hear me okay? So I'm going to talk first about a long-time benefit available to historic property owners across the country, and that is a federal tax deduction through what's called a conservation easement. And basically what a conservation easement is a donation by the historic property owner of the right to review alterations and changes to the building to a easement holding organization. This is essentially a contract between the property owner and the easement holding organization, which types of organizations that hold easements in San Francisco, of course, include San Francisco Heritage. Other preservation organizations also are eligible to receive donations of conservation easements, including the California Preservation Foundation and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I don't believe CPF's easement program is currently active, however. So basically, the property owner is donating the right to review exterior alterations, typically, to the preservation organization in perpetuity. This donation is reflected in an easement contract that is recorded on the title of the property and is in effect in perpetuity, meaning we as a preservation organization accept the responsibility to review, monitor compliance with the terms of the easement forever. Typically, a facade easement will most often protect just the exterior of the building, and that's the case with the vast majority of the 60+ easements that San Francisco Heritage currently holds throughout San Francisco. However, some buildings have highly significant features on the interior that can also be regulated under the terms of a conservation easement if the owner so chooses. This is a very flexible document. The owner and the preservation organization have full discretion to determine the scope of protections under the easement. You might ask why an owner might want to subject themselves to additional restrictions on the interior of their property, and the answer is pretty simple. The easement, the appraised value of the easement goes up with the increased scope of protection. So the value of the tax deduction that the owner receives is determined by the appraised value of the easement donation at the time of donation. And if you add interior features and landscaping and other things besides just the exterior of the building to the easement, then the value increases and the tax deduction increases. Let's see. So I got a little bit ahead of myself here. So as I just mentioned, the value of the easement is deductible by the property owner from their federal income taxes. Typically, that deduction can take place over 5 years. However, in 2012, the American Taxpayer Relief Act was passed by Congress that extended the period under which the deduction can be claimed by the owner to 15 years. So this most often would be beneficial to larger easement donations on commercial properties that can be appraised for multiple millions of dollars, and the owner just might not have the tax liability to claim that deduction over 1 or 2 years, but will need added time to carry that forward. In terms of how the easement is appraised and the value is determined, there is a small subset of appraisers with expertise in appraising conservation easements. At a very basic level, the easement's value is determined by establishing the fair market value of the property without the easement and then subtracting its value after the easement is donated and the property is subject to restrictions. There is no kind of thumbnail rule that you can rely on to determine the basic percentage. Oftentimes, it comes down to 15 or 20%, but I need to emphasize that that number can go up or down depending on a variety of factors. Typically, the most relevant factors are whether the property is already restricted in some way by whether it be local landmarking laws or a Mills Act contract. If the property is already subject to a Mills Act contract, that will diminish the appraised value of a conservation easement donation because essentially the owner is already subject to restrictions. Let's see here. In terms of eligibility, as opposed to the Mills Act contract, which we just heard about, which you can qualify under multiple levels of designation in San Francisco for Mills Act tax benefits, to qualify for the federal conservation easement deduction, the property must be either individually listed in the National Register of Historic Places or be what's called a contributing property to a National Register historic district. Oftentimes, larger projects will seek National Register designation specifically to take advantage of the tax benefits associated with conservation easement, as well as the federal rehabilitation tax credit, which I'll be covering next. Okay, I'm going to move on to the rehabilitation tax credit. As I mentioned, the federal rehab tax credit is a popular incentive for larger commercial properties, projects in particular. It extends a 20% tax credit based on 20% of eligible rehabilitation expenses involving historic buildings. The building must be income producing to qualify. It cannot be an owner-occupied residential property. It must be, again, like the conservation easement, individually listed in the National Register or a contributor to a National Register district. In order to qualify for the 20%, all rehabilitation work must be performed in compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which I assume you've heard about ad nauseum at previous installments of this course. The credit can be subtracted directly from your federal income taxes and by the owner in the year of project completion. It can also be taken over multiple years. I think it's 5 years. I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to the 20% credit. I failed to mention, given the size of, for larger projects and some notable projects in San Francisco that have taken advantage of the federal rehab tax credit include the Ferry Building rehabilitation, the Exploratorium, Presidio Landmark project pictured here. These projects often use the rehab tax credit to attract investment in their project. There are a number of larger corporations like Chevron and Sherwin-Williams that will actually purchase rehab tax credits and apply them towards their income. So that's what's called syndication, and it's another way to attract equity to your project. Now there's a subset of the federal rehab tax credit for what I'll call non-historic properties, or what the code calls non-historic properties. And what that means is that basically those might be older buildings. Well, they must be older buildings constructed before 1936 under federal law that are not listed in the National Register of Historic Places. They can be deemed significant under local law, but they must not be listed in the National Register of Historic Places to take advantage of the 10% credit. This is an example of a building, I think it's 153 Sutter Street, that has taken advantage of the 10% credit for non-historic buildings. And it can be a popular alternative for developers to the 20% credit if you have a qualifying building, because it's much less the requirements are much less stringent, and the process is not subject to review by the State Office of Historic Preservation or the National Park Service. It does not require any certification after the work is completed that it is appropriate or followed the relevant guidelines, and it's a very quick process without much bureaucratic burden involved. However, it is only a 10% credit based on rehabilitation costs for the building. And I wanted to quickly mention a very exciting initiative that's currently underway. The California Preservation Foundation is actually leading a statewide coalition that has drafted legislation that was recently introduced by Tony Atkins out of San Diego, the new Speaker of the Assembly. And this is for a counterpart state rehab tax credit. And it would be important to note, first of all, the examples that I've discussed, the federal examples that I discussed primarily apply to commercial properties. The state rehab tax credit could be used by homeowners and residential properties as well. This effort is actually I think the third effort to introduce a state rehab tax credit in California. However, to distinguish it from past efforts, this one is enjoying overwhelming support. The State Assembly just a few weeks ago voted 75-0 to move the legislation onto the state Senate. So that obviously bodes well for a potential passage of the state rehab tax credit. Now, California would actually be the 36th state in the country to have a state rehab tax credit. So we're really behind the curve in this area, and there's in the states that do have state rehab tax credits, there's overwhelming evidence that they pay for themselves based on investment in economic activity, jobs, etc., that they generate for work done on historic properties. Quickly to go over the key aspects of the legislation, it would be a 25% state income tax credit that could be twinned with the federal tax credit. There are a couple sweeteners in the legislations that would increase the tax benefit to 30% for projects for the projects listed here on the slide, and I won't read those to you. But like transit-oriented development, which is a big focus in San Francisco, would be eligible to receive a 30% state tax credit should the legislation passed. And as I mentioned earlier, it applies to both income and non-income producing structures. And if passed by the state legislature, it would start January 1st of next year. So this is really an exciting development for those of us in the preservation community. We think that it will be a major incentive to spur additional rehabilitation projects. And in San Francisco, as Eilish mentioned, with the recent streamlining of the Mills Act contract process, there are opportunities like never before for developers of historic properties to qualify for financial benefits associated with rehabilitation. So that concludes my slides. I'm happy to take any questions right now or later on after we wrap up after Kelly's presentation.
Okay, if anybody has any questions, please ask them now in the chat box or raise your hand. If not, and you still have a question, you can always wait until the end of Kelly's presentation. So I'm going to pull up Kelly's presentation right now as she's getting her headset on. And give me 1 second. Okay. I don't
Good,
see any questions coming in right now, so you're free to begin when you want.
okay. Good morning, everyone. This is Kelly Wong. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. So to follow Mike's presentation on incentives, another preservation incentive is more of a policy incentive and the use of the California Historical Building Code. So I thought I would start with an overview of the California Historical Building Code and then follow with a section on sustainability and how it applies to historic buildings. So the California Historical Building Code is a unique section of the California Building Code, the regular code, that provides some alternative regulations and standards for historic buildings that are undergoing preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, or other changes of occupancy. And in order to use the California Historical Building Code, the buildings must be qualified historical buildings, which I will go into on the next slide. All of the work that is undertaken, just like the Mills Act and the previous tax credits mentioned, need to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. However, any new construction must comply by the regular code, but any adjacent elements that are historic can use the alternatives in the California Historical Building Code. And they are typically governed by the local building department. So talking here in San Francisco to the Department of Building Inspection, you know, the fire marshal, also working with the Department of Public Works when you're dealing with issues such as accessibility. So what is a qualified historic building? The key things to remember is that it is a building that is listed on either a city, state, or national register. It can be individually listed or a contributor to a historic district like Mike was saying, but they do not have to be a landmark. And actually in San Francisco, buildings can actually be surveyed and evaluated individually. Either through a citywide survey or through an individual historic resource evaluation process, which can determine that they are historic. And here in San Francisco, the process typically is, I think Mary Brown had shown you a little bit about our property information map where you can find out or to determine whether or not the building that you have or the homeowner has is a resource or not, if it's an A designated resource. Once you have that determination, in order to use the California Historical Building Code, you can contact the planning department, and we are happy to then write up a memo that says this is a historic building, and give that memo to the Department of Building Inspection, in which they will then determine whether or not use of the California Historical Building Code for the specific sections you're looking for is appropriate or be approved. So just very briefly, the California Historical Building Code is part of the regular building code here in California. 2013 is actually the current version of the code, so a new code just came out. It's very similar to the previous one, and it is performance-based, meaning that there's a little bit more latitude in its interpretation. And the sections within this code is here on the slide. So everything from fire protection to accessibility to energy. You can also download a copy from the California Division of State Architects website at this link. So what are some of the benefits of using the California Historical Building Code? Well, one of the major advantages is that historic buildings are exempt from Title 24 Energy Code. And this means, replacing windows from single glazing to double pane is really not required, so that you don't lose the character of some of these really unique historic buildings. you can, change out a single pane window using laminated, which will provide you a little bit more thermal comfort and also reduce noise at the same time. Or, for example, you don't have to actually rewire existing light fixtures if you can show that the existing light fixture is not a life safety or fire hazard. Some other advantages include the use of fire sprinklers to meet construction requirements in the regular code, typically to comply by fire safety standards. For example, if you have a double-loaded corridor here on this bottom left corner, in most cases, those corridors would have to be fire rated, and all of the transoms you see above the door and those high clear story sort of windows would need to be completely blocked off for fire. However, use of the California Historical Building Code with sprinklers and some other measures, you can keep those really beautiful character defining features. And just in speaking about sprinklers, they really can be easily and sensitively installed in buildings in decorative or simple ceilings. So another major benefit is the equivalent alternative provisions within the California Historical Building Code to meet accessibility. For example, in the code, in this code, they would allow for narrower door opening sizes. Instead of your typical 36 inches, you can go down to I think as small as like 29.5 inches. They also allow for steeper ramp slopes. And also for the use of push buttons to meet level landings, for, say, storefront owners that have accessibility issues on, more historic buildings and for their commercial spaces, and installation of unisex toilet rooms as opposed to two separate, either a male and a female restroom. I believe I sent a list of resources and websites for John, to John, so he probably will share that with you, but in that list of resources, they include the Americans with Disabilities Act, what it is, and then also a checklist for existing buildings for readily achievable barrier removal. And then also a very important document, a very useful document, the Preservation Brief 32, Making Historic Properties Accessible, in case you're interested in understanding sort of how to balance the two. And so really, you need to work with your local enforcement agency. And again, here is the building department. And in terms of accessibility, should your local building department deny the use of the California Historical Building Code, specifically for accessibility, there is typically an Access Appeals Commission that can provide or determine any sort of equivalent facilitation of these types of requirements. Another element that is not covered by this code but can be used to meet the code is performance-based engineering. Just wanted to throw this out there. It typically models the level of safety you're looking for and the strength of existing buildings. Typically, regular codes do not consider the actual strength or value of existing building materials, but this really provides a more sensitive approach to rehabilitating a historic building. So here, for example, is the performance-based engineering that was used at the Montgomery Street Barracks at the Presidio in San Francisco, which then determined that the existing brick walls were actually of some strength. And so instead of using a really, large concrete shear wall, which would really change the character of the walls, which, add a great depth to the wall and making those openings, the window openings, really really deep. They opted to use FRP, which is fiber reinforced polymer, where you see in the middle photo they're installing in strips. And at the end of the day, it really was a very minor touch and kept the character of the historic buildings. So now I'm going to just dive right into sustainability. So there has been a pretty late convergence of sustainability and historic preservation, even though there was some initial interest as early as the 1970s. Only recently has there been a real newfound interest in bringing sustainability practices into the practice of preservation. And in preservation, typically sustainability is really the nexus of, bringing the people, the society together with the built environment and the economy. And the general interest really is mainly focused on materials management, creating and maintaining community identity, and using more resources efficiently. And just so that we don't forget, the greenest building is the one that already exists. So when we're looking at sustainability, the first thing we typically like to look at is what is the original design of the building, and are there any passive energy systems that are inherent in the original design? And so a little quick overview of passive energy. It's the principles in how historic buildings can the use of the building's natural resources, the structure, materials, design for heating and cooling. And in this section, I'm going to go over what the principles of passive energy is within historic buildings, and how you can reintroduce them or even couple them with some really simple, appropriate technologies to enhance those original design concepts. So passive energy, as I said, is the use of the building's existing resources. And these typically, what we're looking at are the siting and orientation of the building, and how they might collect solar heat, or how the wind comes, how it interfaces with the building. We're looking at thermal mass that can collect heat during the day, release it at night. Operable openings such as windows, clear stories, transoms for natural and cross ventilation, glazing types and assemblies used at these openings, and perhaps any sort of overhangs or shutter devices that are used for shading. Sometimes only minor repairs are required to bring some of these original passive energy systems back. For example, repairs to existing windows to bring them to operable condition is a very simple way to improve a building's energy efficiency. Simple repairs such as weather stripping or replacing glazing putting, replacing the hardware, installing sealant around window openings is enough to bring a window back to good condition. And a publication on the evaluation of energy performance of windows when they're comparing window rehabilitation versus replacement by the Preservation Green Lab is available on their website. Typically, in this study, they actually found that you can gain almost the same performance value for new replacement windows by just upgrading some of your windows at a fraction of the cost. So there really is a greater return on your investment than the cost of replacement windows in some cases. Some of the disadvantages of replacement windows that they point out are that, new wood frame windows, just like all old growth wood used for framing and other building construction will not last as long. And also this high performance glazing that you usually see in some of the new replacement windows are 2 to 4 times as much in their cost, and don't really provide the return that you're thinking you're purchasing. And then here are some really simple examples of appropriate technologies that could be coupled with passive energy systems that could use that you can use in the historic buildings, not only just for sustainable practice, but to provide a better environment for some of the occupants using a building, or also to market a building when it's up for resale. So anything from installing insulation at the wall or roof, if it doesn't, remove any historic fabric, very simple. Adding glazing films, for blocking heat gain if that is an issue because it's west facing or there's just a really large area. installing radiant heating at the floor, which is one of the most efficient heating systems. You don't have to remove your floor. You can actually install radiant heating systems to wood floors as well from the underside if that's possible. You can add ceiling fans to promote ventilation and bring some of the warm air down. And then you can also, consider other, renewable energy sources such as photovoltaic cells, in a location that does not impact the character of historic buildings. The San Francisco Planning Department is actually currently working on a report on passive energy systems in historic buildings that cover a little bit, about what is energy, what are passive energy systems, and then some of the simple technologies that can be coupled with existing systems. And then also the process of looking at a project, how to plan for it, how to implement it, and also resources, people to talk to, such as, the Pacific Energy Center here in San Francisco that offer free design services and advice. And then there's also a section on financial incentives, and I sent John a list of resources for other websites that might be of use relating to this, and then a glossary, and then the report will be available on our planning department website in the very near future. We're still in draft form, but we're working now with the Department of Building Inspection to finalize it. And another great resource is the Technical Preservation Services under the National Park Service. There's a great website about, energy efficiency in historic buildings, new technologies, and historic properties, such as, here you see on the website in the image is the use of infrared thermography to figure out, where air leakage may be around windows, at walls, other openings, sustainable practices and sustainable preservation in practice, and guidelines. And so speaking of the guidelines, this is actually a really, really great resource, especially for historic properties. The National Park Service finally in 2011 published the first version of the illustrated guidelines on sustainability for rehabilitating historic buildings. It's kind of like the Secretary of the Interior standards, but focused specifically on sustainability. If you go on site, you can actually find an interactive web feature that takes you to each specific section. And they talk about weatherization, energy audits for baseline, modifying user behaviors, and all of this other really cool stuff. And I wanted to end on this. The Preservation Green Lab is a Seattle-based sort of like a task force under the National Trust, launched in 2009 to advance research exploring the value that older buildings can actually bring to their communities, and also policy solutions that might make it easier to reuse and to green historic buildings. So a really great website, and I believe in the list of resources, I also, supplied some websites to LEED, which I think, most people know what the leadership in energy and environmental design is. There is a specific section for existing buildings. Typically it's for operations and maintenance. So once a building has been certified and it wants to be, maybe as new construction later on, it wants to come in to be recertified under the operations and maintenance, thinking about recommissioning and which is, coming back to a building after it's been occupied and doing a reconnaissance and evaluation whether or not, the systems that were installed, are actually functioning the way they were meant to function, and whether or not they're actually reaching the performance targets that were originally designed. There are also preservation briefs by the National Park Service. Of specific, I think, interest to all of you could be number 3, which is improving energy efficiency in historic buildings. Number 9, the repair of historic wood windows. And then number 13, the repair and thermal upgrade of historic steel windows. These are all available on their website, and it'll be on your resource list. In San Francisco, we have the Green Building Ordinance as well, which is very specific. The U.S. Department of Energy also has a loan guarantee program, and the SF Environment, which is part of the city of San Francisco, has some commercial efficiency rebates that are available. So I think that concludes my presentation, and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thanks, Kelly. I think some questions are rolling in,
Okay.
and Val was asking what slide number we're on. I think we're on slide 20 of Kelly's presentation.
Yes.
So the first question I might want to ask is with some of these, like the U.S. Department of Energy loan guarantee program that you briefly mentioned. Does it only apply to commercial buildings, or is it residential? Do you know much about it?
We have not processed those, so I don't know the specifics about those. That was part of our recent passive energy systems report that we found that, and let me see if I can pull that up. That is for commercial, industrial, nonprofit, schools, local government, state government, agricultural, institutional, and any non-federal entity and manufacturing facility. So it does look like it's much more on the commercial side and
Okay.
not residential.
And maybe while some of these other questions are coming in, what about the Green Building Ordinance? I don't know how much, I'm not sure if I missed it, but how much does that directly deal with historic properties?
Uh, I, there are some more about landscaping issues, but I believe that there are also sections within that that ordinance that are focused on local requirements in addition to sort of all of the other lead requirements. And I believe the focus is on materials management and trying to reuse, existing building materials, windows. And I believe that you would get some additional credits for reusing some of those materials.
Great. And
And the
I'll follow
incentive.
up with another question.
Okay. And I was
Oh,
going to
yeah,
say,
go ahead.
I think the one of the incentives is that you are placed on a priority permit review when you are going through a lead process, or I think there's actually another local lead equivalent green system that would allow you to qualify for this priority processing. So it's more of a policy incentive than a financial incentive.
Great, great. And maybe I don't know if Mike mentioned it, and if he's able to speak right now, he might be able to answer this question. And I should know this actually, but it has to do with the state historic rehab credit and what level of designation is required. And my understanding is that it has to be a state historic resource or designated on the state list. And I'm wondering if Mike could confirm that.
Can you okay, hold on. He'll be right here. Okay. Can he come back to that question? Do you have another
Sure.
one? And he's
Sure. Okay. And I don't see any questions here actually, which is unusual. Maybe you all presented so well that people aren't. It looks like most of what they were interested in was covered. But if anybody has any questions, please do type them in the chat box. Some people are saying that they're missing the visuals, which I don't think most people are, but if they're on a mobile device, they may have missed a few of them. And of course, if there are more questions that come up, anybody that's on the line right now can feel more than free to email me, and what I'll do is I'll approach the questions, or approach the speakers with these questions, and I can send them back to you. But it looks like a few people are typing um, questions right now, so I'll wait a little while. And let's see.
So this is Mike. I'm going to attempt to answer the question regarding the state rehab tax credit. At minimum, it would properties listed in the National Register or California Register would qualify. In California, especially since the intent is to pair the state credit with the federal credit. Now in California, if you're listed in the National Register, you're automatically under state law also listed in the California Register. So either one would qualify. The question I was trying to find out is whether or not locally designated properties independently would also qualify for the state credit, and that's what I'm looking into right now. But
Right. Yeah, and I will say my understanding is at this moment, locally designated properties aren't included in the program, but I don't know if it's a very skeletal bill at this point, my understanding, and it may change uh, over the next couple of months. So, yeah, and
okay.
yeah, my understanding was locally designated, but the state register and the national register, of course. So, and there are many more state designated than there are national in the state of California. So, um, and so if there are no further questions, I thought people were typing questions in, but I don't see any right there. So if there are no further questions, I guess I'll move over to the final portion of this presentation. And thanks to each of our speakers. In fact, Mike and Kelly and Eilish are all our partners in this program. So I wanted also to give specific thanks to the San Francisco Heritage and also the San Francisco Planning Department for their partnership. It wouldn't have been possible without their help. So what I have up on the screen right now is an evaluation page. So I encourage all of the realtors, please to tell us know what you thought of the program. And I also wanted to congratulate everybody because you're now complete with the program. But if you missed any previous sessions, you will need to complete a short 10-question quiz after watching the recording for the session you missed. To do so, you will need to log in to learn.californiapreservation.org and use the username and password issued to you. And once we mark you as complete for all 4 sessions, you should be receiving your certificate and insignia within 5 business days. You'll receive the certificate in an email, but if you would prefer a printed version, just let me know. We hope you've enjoyed the program. We rely on your feedback, and you are officially the first group of realtors to receive this certification, so we hope you find it a valuable tool in marketing your properties. So don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions. And I wanted everybody to enjoy the rest of your day. When you submit the responses on the feedback form, simply scroll back to the top of the page and click Submit Response to make sure that it's submitted. On the bottom of the page, there are a number of fill-in-the-blank kind of questions. That's where we learn the most about what you would like to see in the program, so please also fill that out. Again, thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right.